Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War Political Update concerning the frozen Russian assets, the huge stash of cash that predominantly Belgians have under their jurisdiction through Euroclear, the clearinghouse. There's a hope that Europe convening as they are at the moment in terms of the EU, I think foreign ministers, is it, or finance ministers convening. They have been discussing this since yesterday. They'll be doing so today, and indeed, I think tomorrow. We're going to be talking about what Ursula von der Leyen has said, but also the big claim that though we've seen the White House bully some of these EU states apparently to not release the frozen Russian assets because the Americans want to have dibs on it for their own investment purposes, which is obviously highly controversial. Talked about that the other day. Now we're hearing that the Russians have been bullying and threatening European diplomats as well over this these frozen Russian assets, and that is incredibly controversial. So we'll get into the details, but remember, if you haven't done so already, please like, subscribe and share. It makes a difference and also helps keep you in the loop. Right, let's get into a few more details. Okay, so we have Ursula von der Leyen here. No report says EU diplomats are discussing today how to use frozen Russian assets to fund a reparations loan for Ukraine in 2026 to 2027, including military aid. Some resistance remains, including from Belgium and Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said two options are on the table and will be discussed. One is funding through the EU budget, and the second possibility is the reparations loan underwritten by those frozen Russian assets. So she has also said we will not leave the European Council today without a solution for the funding or for Ukraine for the next 2 years. Zelenskyy has said Putin will abandon diplomacy if Ukraine does not receive a reparations loan from the EU. Then he will decide to continue the war. So there really is a lot riding on this. Tim White says President Zelenskyy has arrived in Brussels himself and will be making his way to the EU summit. Ahead of the meeting, he pledged, quote, a withdrawal of Ukraine's armed forces from Donbass is unacceptable for Ukraine. So the United States is looking for a compromise. With Belgium and now Italy opposed to Russia's frozen assets and Putin's allies, leaders of Slovakia and Hungary also voting against, there is skepticism that the EU will agree. Ursula von der Leyen says how aid to Ukraine will be resolved today, one way or another. Let's take a listen.
We're speaking about 137 billion euros that are necessary. It's the estimate, our own estimate, and the estimate of the IMF. And we have committed to cover 2/3 of it, 90 billion euros. I have made two proposals, two options on the table for this funding. One is funding through the EU budget, borrowing against the budget, and the second possibility is the reparations loan. So today we will have the discussions about which one of the two we will use. It will be intensive discussions. For me, the most important part is that at the end of the day, we have secured the funding for Ukraine for the next 2 years.
So really important, but it looks like, it's interesting she put as a first option funding from the EU, kind of loans against the budget, rather than reparations loan underwritten by those frozen Russian assets. So interesting. Prime Minister Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, says now we have a simple choice, either money today or blood tomorrow. And I'm not talking about Ukraine only, I'm talking about Europe. And this is our decision to make, and only ours. I think all European leaders have to finally rise to the occasion. So this is all that I can say. Pretty stark words from Tusk. On the other hand, you've got his toadship himself, Viktor Orban. Hungary's Prime Minister Orban claims talks on using frozen Russian assets for Ukraine have hit a dead end, and he might be right on that, saying there's no majority support. When pressed if he's acting in Europe or Moscow's interest, he replied, I work for peace. Of course you do, matey. Of course you do. Now, as mentioned before, there was this article in Politico saying the EU struggle isn't just about Belgium blocking the use of the frozen Russian assets for Ukraine. It's about intense US pressure. According to Politico, Trump officials have been pushing European capitals to reject the plan, deepening divisions just days before a crucial EU summit. So that's what we heard previously, that indeed there was all this pressure coming from the White House, and they were individually picking, it appears, on vulnerable nations or nations that they feel aligned to try and get them not to sign up to the use of frozen Russian assets from Europe going to Ukraine, because the Trump administration wants that money for themselves so they can use it to invest with Russia. I think it's highly controversial. It's interesting that Congress has come out and agreed to the National Defense Authorization Act, which will see, I think, $800 million go to Ukraine over 2 years. So Congress essentially is working against the Trump administration. So you've got the good Americans, if you like, in politics, are the or at least in the context of Ukraine, are the congressional lawmakers who are striving to work against the agenda of the Trump White House to try and get aid to Ukraine in other ways. And then you've got the Trump White House that is just aligned with Russia and is working against the, I think, the moral and just outcome for Ukraine. But then, aside from the Trump White House's kind of bullying or persuasive tactics against European leaders, you also have Putin now joining in with a really robust approach in terms of threatening European politicians. Russia has promised the harshest response if its sovereign assets are used to fund Ukraine, in a threat that has alarmed countries including Belgium, Italy, and Austria. Of course, countries that, I mean, Italy's a funny one, but Austria certainly has, Austria had the parliament where loads of parliamentarians walked out when Zelenskyy came in to give his speech. And that was sort of 2 years ago now. I think it was. FPO is their quasi faux libertarian party, actually just a very much a right-wing populist party. They have a huge sort of populist vote behind them, although the government hasn't been formed by them. They had the most votes, and so Russia, which has quite a lot of purchase with that party, has quite a lot of influence in Austria. Then you got Belgium, De Wever, hearing a lot about him and potential connections to Russia. But then also a lot of people are saying, and people are saying in my threads, that Belgium Bart De Wever does have some points with regard to the sharing of risks, and Belgians don't want to be left picking up the pieces if Russia then sue Belgium, and Belgium only, not the EU, over the disbursement of those funds. And so you got Italy as well, that outside of Giorgia Meloni, and I mean, she's in charge of the Brothers of Italy party. I don't know what their position is with regard to Russia, but she's in coalition with Forza and Matteo Salvini's party, La Liga. And Matteo Salvini, the deputy prime minister, is just a super Putin fan, and yeah, these are ripe for the picking. That's why Italy and Austria were two of the countries mentioned in the draft version of the national security strategy for the US, with the idea that they could peel some of these countries away from the EU. It's no surprise that Italy and Austria were two of those countries. So anyway, Putin is then overtly threatening in a public way, like typical kind of saber rattling stuff, but also threatening countries with legal retribution. And then, as Europe eyes Russia's frozen assets, Belgium fears Moscow's revenge, says the Washington Post. Most of Russia's billions in frozen assets are in Belgium, which fears bearing the brunt of Russian lawsuits and worse. Two officials familiar with the matter said the Europeans have received clear signals that the US administration wants to use the assets in settlement, raising the specter of a clash with Europe's leaders. So there's two-pronged attack on the EU from the US on the one hand, and Russia on the other hand, not to release these funds. And Belgium is feeling the heat big time. Belgian Prime Minister Bart De Wever admitted the Kremlin threatened him personally. Now he opposes using 210 billion euros in frozen Russian assets for Ukraine, and calls victory a fairy tale and asset seizure theft, says the Euromaidan press. So it looks like this attempt to bully European leaders to make a decision in favor of, I guess, both the US and Russia. The US and Russian approaches are working. So Bill Browder says Belgium says Russian assets plan is going backwards ahead of the EU summit. I believe, he says, that a number of Belgian politicians have been threatened with death from Russia and they are panicking. They should resign if they can't be brave and do the right thing. We have Euroclear was threatened yesterday with a Fitch downgrade. So this is coming from the US for EU lawless thievery that would potentially destabilize custody of over 40 trillion in global assets, but particularly EU sovereign debt that funds the thieving EU, says this person. Okay, fair enough. But, you know, Fitch has placed Euroclear Bank on a rating watch negative. Fitch ratings, it has placed Euroclear in that way. So I think you've got another threat coming to decision making concerning the funds frozen in Euroclear. And remember, you've got Olivier Ubi, who was a banker that was threatening Valérie Urban, the CEO of Euroclear. It's all very, very messy and nasty, it looks. The Guardian has an article, Belgian politicians and finance bosses targeted by Russian intelligence overseas assets. Key figures at Frozen Assets Depository among targets of intimidation campaign, say European intelligence agencies. Part of the article says officials believe the campaign is a responsibility of Russia's GRU military intelligence, though there is a debate about the degree of threat. This is security officials indicating that there have been deliberate targeting of key figures at Euroclear, the securities depository holding the frozen Russian assets, and leaders of the country. Quote, they have been engaged in the tactics of intimidation for sure, one European official said. On Thursday and Friday, EU leaders are meeting to decide whether to agree an initial 90 billion euro loan secured on the immobilized Russian assets, bank assets. But Belgium has voiced concerns about the legality of the scheme and says it will only agree if it has guarantees Euroclear will be reimbursed in full if Russia successfully sues for its money. I mean, my position is that had they had a clear pathway to successfully suing, they would have done so already. It's been a long time since this stuff's been frozen. Russia's publicly warned that utilizing the assets would amount to theft, and its central bank said it is seeking 230 billion in damages from Euroclear in a case brought in the country's own courts. But it is understood the intimidation campaign has been focused on key individuals. Threats have been directed at Valérie Urban, the chief executive of Euroclear, and other senior executives at the financial services group. Euroclear declined to comment. Quote, any potential threats are treated with the utmost priority and investigated deeply, often with the support of authorities as appropriate. An investigation earlier this month by the news site EU Observer referenced threats made to Urban in 2024 and 2025, and that she asked for Belgian police protection. This was denied, and she and other companies' executives then hired first a Belgian, then a French security firm to provide bodyguards, according to the report. A profile interview of Urban by Le Monde in November reported that she had been accompanied by a bodyguard for more than a year, though she did not comment directly on her security. In early December, Bart de Wever, Belgium's prime minister, said in an on-stage interview with La Libre newspaper, quote, and who believes that Putin will calmly accept the confiscation of Russian assets? Moscow has let us know that in the event of a seizure, Belgium and I personally will feel the effects for eternity. Asked to explain these comments earlier this month, the Prime Minister's office referred to previous remarks made by De Wever describing the legal and financial risks facing Western companies. At a press conference in October, De Wever had said, quote, Moscow has told us that if we touch the money, we would feel the consequences until eternity, and went on to evoke Russian countermeasures, including confiscation of Western money frozen in Russian banks, seizure of Western companies, and similar decisions from Moscow-friendly jurisdictions. The spokesperson on Wednesday declined to comment on the reported threats against Belgian government ministers or the head of Euroclear, citing safety reasons. So there's clearly threats taking place. They can't really talk about them, but they're there. Threats to De Wever himself, Belgian government ministers, and at least the head of Euroclear and possibly company executives and directors more widely. A spokesperson for Belgium's foreign minister, Maxime Prévost, who is also deputy prime minister and has been involved in talks on the reparations loan, had said they had no such information about threats to him, though. So there's a bit of confusion as to exactly what's going on. But it appears, as you would expect, that Russia is putting a lot of pressure on people within the EU, as is the United States. And like I've said to you before, the EU is left sort of fighting its own battles without support from erstwhile allies. Not that Russia's been an ally, but the US certainly. The EU is kind of a lonely figure in global politics at the moment, fighting for what is right here. And it looks like inside the EU there are issues. I took umbrage at someone yesterday in the comments just slagging off Europe, not from a position of someone who's avowedly pro EU or anything like that, but it's this misunderstanding, like saying, oh, Europe should have done this and Europe should have done that, and Europe is so weak, like without understanding that Europe is the EU plus other countries. Like if you're going to talk about Europe, like Britain is in Europe, Norway's in Europe, Switzerland's in Europe, but they're not in the EU. Or they are to different degrees. So Norway has a different relationship to the EU than the UK. And then you got the EU, which is 27 member states, and they all have their own sovereignty. They all have their own political. These are like, I would never slag off the US on account of what Bolivia did, right? And say, bloody hell, the Americas are so shite. Venezuela have done something nuts, and I go, God, America's stupid. America's weak, as in the whole of North and South America or whatever. It's like, no, that's a load of different countries. So the EU is an organization that binds these countries together, but it isn't this thing that's like magically able to make decisions like that on behalf of all member states and act like a dictator or a single unitary decision-making piece of apparatus. It is, the leadership is responsible for reflecting the wishes of 27 member states. And the problem is with democracy is like herding cats. It's just the reality of it. Like, they don't make decisions quickly. And then when you understand that you've got the US persuading on the one hand all these individual states, and Russia infiltrating and sowing disinformation and influencing in other ways these states, Hungary, Slovakia, Czechia, and then you got the US trying to strong arm, Poland and Italy and so on and so forth. It is bloody difficult, and we need to understand what the EU is and what Europe is, so that particularly from people outside of Europe, a lot of maybe American viewers or whatever, it's very easy to slag off Europe because you think it is something that it isn't. Like, it's like slagging off Asia. Oh, bloody Asia. It's so weak, Asia, isn't it? Oh, there's a lot of countries there, and a lot of countries doing very different things. And to just take one or two countries within an entire continent or an entire international union of countries, and then tar the entirety of that union with the brush of those two countries. I think that's just, we need to be careful when we're talking about the EU. And I do it very often. It's easy to just think that the EU is just this one entity that can just that just makes these decisions easily, and if it's not doing something, it's because it's weak. I mean, the weakness of the EU is in its democracy. I know people slag off the EU for not being democratic enough, but it is democratic, and it's trying to represent 500 million people in 27 member states, and that is a difficult thing to do. Not, one of the biggest examples of this is here. Like, you can say the EU is weak because they can't get this money to Ukraine, but actually that's because a bunch of the countries in the EU don't want to get the money to Ukraine. Okay, so the weakness lies in the fact that you've got 27 countries, and if that, you either have a unanimous decision-making system, which is what most of the main votes are in the EU, and that's really freaking difficult to get 27 nations to unanimously agree, or you have a qualified majority, which is still difficult. But you still got to get over the halfway line at the very least, possibly more. And so, yeah, it's just difficult, and it's really bloody frustrating because everyone should see the light here and be working together for the moral betterment of the world and Ukraine and the EU. But when you have these disinformation projects and persuasion projects from Russia and the US and any other, Uncle John Cobley and all, then things are just more difficult than they damn well should be. Life should be easy, but it's not. Anyway, that's my tuppence. It's so frustrating, this. And, my ire isn't at the EU. My ire is at, say, maybe Belgium and then some of these other nations. But then my ire is at Russia and the US for getting involved in threatening those nations and trying to persuade them in ways that benefits Russia and the US. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. Take care. Speak soon.